The photograph arrived on a Tuesday morning, a picture of my supposedly dead ex-husband sipping cocktails on a yacht in the Bahamas, exactly 18 months after his dramatic funeral where I had sobbed over an empty casket. What he didn't know was that seeing his smug smile while I struggled to keep our children fed would ignite a fury that would systematically dismantle every lie he had built his new life upon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning that changed everything began like any other weekday in my cramped apartment on Maple Street, with the persistent buzz of my alarm clock cutting through the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. I rolled over, squinting at the digital display that announced another day of the carefully orchestrated struggle that had defined my existence since David's supposed death 18 months earlier. The apartment itself told the story of my financial devastation. Where our suburban home had once featured marble countertops and designer furniture, this modest two-bedroom space bore the hallmarks of someone rebuilding from nothing. The second-hand sofa, purchased from a church rummage sale, dominated our tiny living room. My children's artwork covered the walls, not from aesthetic choice, but because I could not afford proper decoration. Every surface carried the weight of careful budgeting, from the generic cereal boxes stacked on kitchen shelves to the discount store curtains that provided privacy from our neighbors. The irony of my circumstances was not lost on me. Before David's elaborate deception, I had been Elena Vasquez, a successful pediatric surgeon with a thriving practice and a reputation that commanded respect throughout Chicago's medical community. My days had been filled with life-or-death decisions in sterile operating rooms, where my steady hands and quick thinking saved children's lives. The transition from that world of precision and purpose to this reality of financial uncertainty and single motherhood represented a fall that still took my breath away during quiet moments. My morning routine had become a testament to efficiency born of necessity. I prepared breakfast for my two children, Sophia and Miguel, ages 12 and 9 respectively, while simultaneously reviewing my work schedule for the day. Since David's supposed death, I had been forced to take a position at a community clinic, where the pay was a fraction of my previous income, but the flexible hours allowed me to manage childcare responsibilities. The prestigious hospital position I had worked years to achieve became impossible to maintain when school pickup times conflicted with surgery schedules, and babysitter costs consumed more money than I could reasonably allocate. Sophia, my eldest, had adapted to our changed circumstances with a maturity that both impressed and concerned me. She helped with household tasks without being asked, monitored her younger brother's homework completion, and never complained about our reduced lifestyle. Her understanding of our financial constraints had developed with an awareness that no 12-year-old should possess. When her friends discussed vacation plans or new purchases, Sophia would redirect conversations with practiced diplomacy, protecting both her own feelings and mine from the stark reality of what we could no longer afford. Miguel, however, struggled more visibly with the transition. His questions about why we had moved from our big house to this small apartment, why we no longer ate at restaurants, and why Daddy had to die, came with an innocence that made each answer feel like another small betrayal. His confusion about death and its permanence mixed with practical concerns about birthday parties and Christmas gifts in ways that highlighted how much our family's foundation had been shattered. The weight of single parenthood pressed against me daily, not just in financial terms, but in the countless decisions that required constant attention. Every choice, from which grocery store offered the best prices to how to explain to the children why we could not afford their previous activities, demanded energy I often felt I did not possess. The emotional labor of maintaining optimism for my children, while privately wrestling with my own grief and anxiety, created an exhausting internal balance that left little room for personal recovery. My mornings began before sunrise, not from choice but from the mathematical reality of managing multiple responsibilities within limited time constraints. While my children slept, I reviewed medical charts, prepared breakfast, organized their school materials, and attempted to maintain some semblance of the professional competence that had once defined my identity. The quiet hours before they woke represented my only opportunity for uninterrupted productivity, making them precious despite their early timing. The community clinic where I now worked stood in sharp contrast to the prestigious medical center where I had previously practiced. Where Northwestern Memorial Hospital had featured cutting-edge equipment and specialist teams, the clinic operated with donated supplies and volunteer staff, who rotated through various roles based on availability. My colleagues were dedicated professionals who chose community service over lucrative private practice, but the resource limitations meant that every procedure required creative problem-solving and careful rationing of materials. My patients at the clinic were primarily uninsured families and recent immigrants who could not access traditional medical care due to financial or documentation barriers. Their stories of resilience and determination provided daily reminders that my circumstances, while challenging, represented temporary setbacks rather than permanent defeats. Maria Santos, a single mother of 4 who cleaned office buildings at night to support her family, always arrived for appointments with genuine gratitude for any medical attention she could receive. Her strength in the face of obstacles that dwarfed my own challenges served as a constant source of perspective and motivation. The legal aftermath of David's supposed death had created additional layers of complexity that continued to affect our daily lives. His life insurance claim remained tied up in bureaucratic processes that seemed designed to exhaust claimants rather than provide support. The house we had shared was sold to pay debts that mysteriously appeared after his death, debts that his estate attorney claimed took precedence over survivor benefits. Every financial document required scrutiny and legal interpretation that consumed both time and money I could not afford to spend. The children's emotional needs during this period demanded constant attention and sensitivity. Sophia had begun experiencing anxiety attacks during the first months after David's death, requiring therapy sessions that our insurance covered only partially. Miguel's academic performance declined as his concentration suffered, necessitating additional tutoring support that stretched our budget further. Both children required reassurance about our financial stability, while I privately questioned that stability myself. My own grief during this period was complicated by practical demands that left little space for processing the emotional impact of losing my life partner. The David the first mourned was not only my husband but also my co-parent, financial partner, and the person who had shared responsibility for major decisions about our family's future. His absence meant that every aspect of our daily lives required individual assessment and decision-making, from managing household repairs to planning for the children's educational expenses. Sleep had become elusive during the months following David's death, not only from emotional stress, but from the practical anxiety of managing finances that never seemed adequate for our needs. I would lie awake calculating monthly expenses, searching for areas where further cuts might be possible, and worrying about unexpected costs that could destabilize our carefully maintained budget. The mathematical reality of single-income survival with 2 children created a constant undercurrent of financial anxiety that colored every decision and purchase. The social isolation that accompanied our reduced circumstances added another dimension to the challenges we faced. Friends from our previous life, while initially supportive, gradually returned to their own comfortable routines that no longer included family activities we could not afford. Playdates became complicated when reciprocal hosting was expected, and social gatherings that once provided relaxation became sources of stress about appropriate contributions or gift expectations. My professional identity had undergone a fundamental transformation that required daily psychological adjustment. Where I had once been Dr. Vasquez, the pediatric surgeon whose opinions carried weight in medical conferences and whose skills saved lives in high-stakes situations, I had become Elena, the clinic doctor who provided basic care and health screenings in a setting that rarely required the advanced training I had spent years acquiring. The intellectual stimulation and professional challenge that had previously energized my work had been replaced by routine examinations and administrative tasks that, while meaningful, did not engage my specialized capabilities. The physical exhaustion of managing multiple responsibilities without adequate support systems had begun affecting my health in ways that concerned me professionally. My own medical training made me acutely aware of the symptoms of chronic stress and insufficient sleep. Yet the practical demands of daily survival left little opportunity to address these health concerns. The irony of being a physician who could not adequately care for her own physical well-being was not lost on me, though addressing this contradiction required resources and time that remained unavailable. This morning routine, which had become my normal pattern over the previous 18 months, was interrupted by the sound of mail sliding through the apartment's front door slot. The timing was unusual, as postal delivery typically occurred later in the day, but I assumed the carrier was managing an adjusted schedule. The children were finishing breakfast when I walked to the door, to collect what I expected would be the usual collection of bills and promotional materials that constituted our daily mail delivery. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Among the expected utility bills and grocery store advertisements was an envelope that immediately captured my attention due to its unusual characteristics. The envelope bore no return address, contained only my name written in unfamiliar handwriting, and felt heavier than typical correspondence. My initial assumption was that it contained legal documents related to David's estate, as various administrative matters continued to surface periodically, requiring my attention and response. The decision to open this particular piece of mail at that moment, rather than setting it aside for later review, would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. As I tore open the envelope's seal, I expected to find insurance forms, probate documents, or correspondence from David's former business associates, who occasionally needed information about completed projects or outstanding contracts. Instead, I discovered a single photograph that would shatter the carefully constructed reality I had been living for the past 18 months, and set in motion a series of events that would transform not only my understanding of my situation, but my approach to reclaiming control over my life and my children's future. The photograph slipped from my trembling fingers and fluttered to the kitchen floor, landing face up beside Sophia's discarded cereal bowl. The image remained impossibly clear despite my disbelief. David, unmistakably alive, wearing designer sunglasses and a linen shirt I had never seen before, raising a champagne glass in a toast aboard what appeared to be an expensive yacht. The tropical background suggested the Caribbean, and his relaxed posture indicated this was not a recent photograph, but rather captured during what should have been his period of supposed death. My medical training had taught me to remain calm during crises, to process information systematically, and respond with calculated precision. Yet standing in my modest kitchen, staring at evidence that my husband had orchestrated his own death to escape financial obligations to his family, I experienced a complete dissolution of professional composure. The rational part of my mind recognized the symptoms of shock that I had observed in countless patients: rapid heartbeat, difficulty breathing, and the sensation that reality had become fundamentally unreliable. Sophia noticed my distress immediately, her developing maternal instincts already finely tuned to changes in my emotional state. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked, abandoning her breakfast to move toward me with concern that no 12-year-old should need to carry. Her question penetrated the fog of disbelief that had enveloped my consciousness, forcing me to confront the immediate practical challenge of protecting my children from this devastating revelation, while simultaneously processing its implications for our future. The photograph represented more than evidence of David's deception. It constituted proof that everything I had believed about our circumstances for the past 18 months had been carefully constructed lies. The grief I had experienced, the financial struggles that had reshaped our daily existence, the emotional trauma my children had endured believing their father was dead, all of these consequences had been unnecessary suffering inflicted by someone who had chosen personal convenience over family responsibility. My relationship with David had begun 12 years earlier during my surgical residency at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. He had been working as a biomedical equipment consultant, servicing the advanced machinery that supported complex surgical procedures. His technical expertise and calm demeanor in high-pressure environments had initially attracted my attention, as had his apparent respect for the medical profession and the life-saving work that defined my career aspirations. David possessed qualities that had seemed ideal for partnership with someone pursuing a demanding medical career. He understood irregular schedules, appreciated the intellectual challenges of surgical practice, and demonstrated genuine interest in my professional development. During our courtship, he had attended medical conferences with me, engaged thoughtfully with my colleagues, and provided emotional support during the grueling years of specialty training that demanded everything I had to give. Our marriage had represented what I believed to be a partnership between equals who respected each other's professional ambitions while building a shared foundation for raising children. David's income from his consulting business had provided financial stability during my residency years, when my own earnings were minimal. His willingness to handle household responsibilities during my surgical rotations had enabled me to focus completely on developing the skills necessary for pediatric surgery, one of the most demanding medical specializations. The birth of Sophia had strengthened what I perceived to be our partnership approach to balancing career and family responsibilities. David had eagerly embraced fatherhood, attending every prenatal appointment and demonstrating genuine excitement about becoming a parent. His involvement in childcare during Sophia's early years had enabled my transition from residency to attending physician without compromising either my professional development or our daughter's emotional needs. Miguel's arrival 3 years later had required additional coordination between our schedules, but David had continued to demonstrate reliability and engagement in parenting responsibilities. His business had expanded during this period, requiring occasional travel that he managed around my surgical schedule to ensure continuous childcare coverage. The financial success of his consulting practice had enabled our move to the suburban home where we had planned to raise our children through their school years. The gradual changes in David's behavior that preceded his supposed death had been subtle enough that I attributed them to normal stress from business expansion rather than evidence of deception. His increased travel frequency, longer periods of unavailability during business trips, and growing concern about financial pressures had seemed consistent with someone managing a growing company during challenging economic conditions. David's technical background had made him naturally adept with computers and digital communications, skills that I now realized had enabled him to construct elaborate deceptions about his business activities and financial situation. His ability to provide plausible explanations for extended absences, unusual expenses, and changes in income patterns had prevented me from questioning the legitimacy of his reported business challenges. The months preceding his supposed death had been marked by increasingly frequent discussions about financial stress and business difficulties that David claimed were affecting his consulting practice. He had described losing major contracts, dealing with clients who delayed payments, and struggling to maintain the income levels that had previously supported our lifestyle. These explanations had seemed credible given the economic uncertainties that were affecting many businesses during that period. David's apparent emotional distress during this time had convinced me that his financial concerns were genuine rather than manufactured pretexts for future deception. He had displayed symptoms of depression and anxiety that appeared authentic, including sleep difficulties, appetite changes, and withdrawal from social activities that had previously brought him pleasure. My medical training had enabled me to recognize these symptoms as consistent with someone experiencing genuine psychological stress. The life insurance policies that David had increased shortly before his supposed death had not raised immediate suspicions, because he had presented these changes as responsible financial planning during a period of business uncertainty. His argument that additional coverage would protect our family if something happened to him during his stressful period had seemed prudent rather than suspicious. The timing of these policy modifications only became significant in retrospect. David's supposed death had been reported as a drowning accident during a business trip to Lake Michigan. According to the police report I had reviewed countless times during the subsequent investigation, he had been found unconscious on a remote beach by early morning joggers who had immediately called emergency services. The responding paramedics had transported him to a nearby hospital, where he had been pronounced dead despite resuscitation attempts. The hospital documentation had appeared complete and authentic, including detailed medical records that described the treatment attempts and ultimate failure to revive him. The death certificate had been signed by the attending physician and processed through normal administrative channels without any indication of irregularities or suspicious circumstances. The funeral home had handled all arrangements with professional competence that had suggested routine rather than elaborate deception. The funeral itself had been an emotionally devastating experience that had required tremendous effort to endure while supporting my children through their grief. David's family had attended from various distant locations, expressing genuine sorrow that had seemed impossible to fabricate. His former colleagues and business associates had offered condolences and shared memories that had appeared authentic rather than rehearsed performances. The absence of David's body during the funeral service had been explained as a family preference for cremation following the drowning accident. This decision had seemed reasonable given the circumstances, and I had not questioned the funeral director's handling of arrangements that spared us from viewing his physical remains. The cremation certificate had been processed normally, and his supposed ashes had been interred in a cemetery plot that I continued to visit with the children. The legal proceedings following David's death had involved extensive documentation and verification processes that had appeared legitimate throughout their duration. His estate attorney had provided detailed explanations of probate requirements, insurance claim procedures, and debt settlement obligations that had seemed consistent with normal legal protocols. The delays and complications that had prevented immediate financial relief had been frustrating, but not obviously suspicious. The debts that had emerged following David's supposed death had been substantial enough to consume most of his estate value, leaving minimal inheritance for me and the children. These financial obligations had been documented with creditor statements and legal filings that had appeared authentic during my review. The priority given to debt settlement over survivor benefits had been explained as standard legal procedure that protected creditors' interests. My transition from the suburban lifestyle we had maintained during David's supposed life to our current modest circumstances had been gradual enough to seem like natural adjustment to reduced income rather than evidence of systematic fraud. The sale of our home, the liquidation of investments, and the elimination of discretionary expenses had followed logical patterns for someone managing financial crisis following a spouse's death. The children's adjustment to their father's supposed death had been monitored carefully through counseling services that had helped them process grief and develop coping strategies for life without David's presence. Sophia's initial anger and confusion had evolved into protective behavior toward Miguel and me that had demonstrated remarkable emotional maturity. Miguel's questions about death and permanence had required ongoing attention and patience as he struggled to understand concepts beyond his developmental capacity. My own grief during the 18 months following David's supposed death had encompassed not only the loss of my life partner, but also the fundamental restructuring of my identity, from married professional to single mother managing constant financial pressure. The support systems that had previously enabled my surgical career had disappeared, forcing me to accept reduced professional responsibilities that accommodated single parenting demands while providing inadequate income for our previous lifestyle. The photograph now lying on my kitchen floor represented evidence that every assumption about our circumstances had been deliberately constructed through elaborate deception. The emotional trauma my children had experienced, the financial hardships that had reshaped our daily existence, and the professional sacrifices I had made to accommodate single motherhood had all been unnecessary consequences of David's selfish choice to escape responsibility rather than address legitimate financial obligations. Standing in my kitchen, looking at proof of my husband's betrayal while my children finished breakfast before school, I experienced a transformation that felt both instantaneous and inevitable. The grief and self-doubt that had characterized my emotional state for 18 months began converting into focused determination to expose David's deception and reclaim the life he had stolen from our family through his elaborate fraud. The motivation that began building within me at that moment was not driven by revenge or personal vindictiveness, but rather by the recognition that David's actions had caused unnecessary suffering for our children, and that allowing his deception to continue would perpetuate the injustice he had inflicted upon us. The strength I had demonstrated in rebuilding our lives following his supposed death would now be directed toward ensuring that his fraud would not ultimately succeed in escaping the consequences of his choices. The immediate necessity of maintaining normalcy for my children, while internally processing the devastating implications of David's deception, required every ounce of professional composure I had developed during years of managing medical emergencies. I carefully picked up the photograph from the kitchen floor, ensuring that neither Sophia nor Miguel could observe the image that had fundamentally altered my understanding of our circumstances. The need to complete their morning routine without causing alarm demanded absolute control over my emotional responses. After securing the children's departure for school with their usual backpacks and lunch preparations, I returned to the kitchen table and examined the photograph with the systematic attention I typically reserved for reviewing medical imaging. Every detail demanded scrutiny. The yacht's distinctive design features, the tropical vegetation visible in the background, David's clothing and apparent physical condition, and most significantly, the timestamp visible in the photograph's corner that placed this image firmly within the period when he was supposedly deceased. The yacht itself appeared to be a luxury vessel of significant value, suggesting that David's supposed financial difficulties had been fabricated rather than genuine. The pristine condition of the boat and the professional quality of its amenities indicated access to resources that contradicted every explanation he had provided about business failures and mounting debts. The casual manner in which he held the champagne glass suggested familiarity with this lifestyle rather than a temporary escape or brief indulgence. David's physical appearance in the photograph revealed evidence of considerable time spent in tropical climates, with a tan that indicated extended exposure to Caribbean sunshine rather than brief vacation travel. His relaxed posture and genuine smile suggested comfort and satisfaction that stood in stark contrast to the stress and depression he had displayed during the months preceding his supposed death. The expensive clothing and accessories visible in the image represented luxury purchases that contradicted his reported financial constraints. The background elements of the photograph provided additional clues about his current location and circumstances. The distinctive architecture visible beyond the yacht suggested a Caribbean location, possibly the Bahamas or similar island destination known for favorable financial regulations and limited extradition agreements. The presence of other luxury vessels in the harbor indicated that David had positioned himself within a community of individuals with substantial resources and sophisticated understanding of international financial arrangements. My medical training had instilled systematic approaches to problem solving that proved invaluable when applied to investigating David's deception. The same methodical attention to detail that enabled accurate diagnosis of complex medical conditions could be redirected toward uncovering the scope and mechanics of his fraud. The analytical skills that had earned my reputation as a thorough and reliable surgeon would now serve the purpose of documenting evidence for potential legal proceedings. The first phase of my investigation required establishing the authenticity of the photograph and determining its source. The envelope that had contained the image provided minimal information, bearing only my name in unfamiliar handwriting and lacking any return address or postmark that might indicate its origin. The paper quality and printing characteristics of the photograph suggested professional development rather than amateur photography, indicating that someone with access to quality equipment had captured and processed this image. The decision to contact my former colleague, Dr. Michael Harrison, who had specialized in forensic pathology before transitioning to private consulting, represented my first concrete step toward verifying the photograph's legitimacy. Michael's expertise in image analysis and document authentication had been valuable during previous legal cases involving medical malpractice claims. His discretion and professionalism made him an ideal resource for preliminary investigation without risking premature exposure of my suspicions. Michael's examination of the photograph confirmed my initial assessment regarding its authenticity and recent creation. His analysis of the image's metadata revealed that the photograph had been captured within the previous 2 weeks using professional camera equipment, definitively placing David's presence in the Caribbean during a period when he should have been deceased for over 18 months. The technical verification of the image's legitimacy eliminated any possibility that this evidence represented digital manipulation or mistaken identity. The implications of this confirmed evidence extended far beyond personal betrayal to encompass serious criminal activity that had affected not only my family, but also insurance companies, legal institutions, and government agencies that had processed David's supposed death. The fraudulent death certificate, the false insurance claims, and the manufactured estate proceedings represented systematic deception that constituted multiple felonies with significant legal and financial consequences. My decision to document every aspect of my investigation reflected both my medical training in maintaining detailed records and my recognition that exposing David's fraud would require compelling evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny. The notebook I began maintaining that day would eventually contain hundreds of pages documenting dates, times, contacts, financial records, and discoveries that collectively revealed the sophisticated nature of David's deception and its far-reaching consequences. The process of reviewing our financial records from the period preceding David's supposed death revealed patterns that had been invisible during my initial grief, but became obvious when examined with knowledge of his continued existence. Credit card statements showed purchases that had seemed like normal business expenses but now appeared to be preparations for extended travel and new identity establishment. Unusual cash withdrawals and transfers to previously unknown accounts suggested systematic preparation for disappearance, rather than legitimate business difficulties. David's computer equipment, which had remained in our home office following his supposed death, provided another avenue for investigation that might reveal additional evidence of his deception. My limited technical expertise required assistance from Sophia, whose digital literacy exceeded my own capabilities, and whose motivation to help increased when I explained that we were searching for information that might improve our financial situation without revealing the full scope of what I suspected. The deleted files that Sophia recovered from David's computer contained correspondence and documents that painted a comprehensive picture of his planned deception. Email exchanges with individuals whose names I did not recognize discussed strategies for obtaining false documentation, establishing offshore financial accounts, and maintaining communications while avoiding detection by authorities. The systematic nature of these preparations indicated that David's supposed death had been planned for months, or possibly years, rather than executed as an impulsive response to temporary difficulties. Banking records that David had attempted to delete revealed transfers to accounts in Caribbean financial institutions known for maintaining client confidentiality and resisting requests for information from United States authorities. The amounts involved exceeded the debts that had supposedly consumed his estate, confirming that his reported financial difficulties had been fabricated to justify liquidating assets while concealing their actual destination. Insurance documents discovered among the deleted files showed that David had researched policy terms and payout procedures extensively before increasing his coverage and staging his supposed death. His careful attention to elimination periods, investigation protocols, and documentation requirements demonstrated sophisticated understanding of insurance fraud techniques that enabled him to structure his deception for maximum probability of success. The discovery of travel documents bearing David's photograph but featuring an unfamiliar name confirmed that he had obtained false identification that enabled international travel without detection. The passport and supporting documentation appeared professionally manufactured rather than hastily improvised, suggesting access to criminal networks specializing in identity fraud and document forgery. Communication records revealed ongoing contact between David and unknown associates, who appeared to be providing support services for maintaining his false identity and avoiding detection. These exchanges discussed strategies for monitoring law enforcement interest in his case, maintaining surveillance of our family's activities, and coordinating financial transfers that funded his new lifestyle, while avoiding patterns that might trigger investigations. The emotional impact of discovering the systematic nature of David's betrayal required constant effort to process, while maintaining focus on documenting evidence and developing strategies for exposure. The revelation that his supposed death had been carefully planned rather than impulsively executed meant that every moment of grief I had experienced, every struggle my children had endured, and every sacrifice I had made had been calculated consequences that David had deliberately inflicted upon his family. The recognition that David had been monitoring our activities following his supposed death added an additional dimension of violation to his betrayal. The knowledge that he had observed our financial struggles, our emotional trauma, and our efforts to rebuild our lives while choosing to maintain his deception represented a level of callousness that challenged my understanding of the person I had believed I had married and loved. My investigation also revealed that David had been receiving assistance from individuals who possessed expertise in criminal activity and fraud concealment. The sophistication of his false documentation, the strategic selection of his hiding location, and the elaborate financial arrangements that supported his new lifestyle indicated access to professional criminal services that extended beyond his individual capabilities. The scope of David's deception encompassed not only insurance fraud and identity theft but also potential tax evasion, money laundering, and violation of numerous federal regulations governing financial reporting and international transfers. The criminal charges that could potentially be filed against him carried substantial penalties, including significant prison sentences and forfeiture of assets that had been concealed through his fraudulent activities. The realization that exposing David's fraud would require navigating complex legal and investigative processes, while protecting my children from additional trauma demanded careful planning and professional guidance. The evidence I had discovered provided a strong foundation for criminal complaints, but converting this information into successful prosecution would require coordination with law enforcement agencies and legal professionals who specialized in financial crimes. The motivation that sustained my investigation during this initial phase derived not from personal vindictiveness, but from recognition that David's actions had caused unnecessary suffering for our children, and that his continued success in avoiding consequences encouraged similar crimes by others. The systematic documentation of his deception represented my commitment to ensuring that his fraud would ultimately fail, and that justice would be achieved through proper legal channels. The strength I discovered within myself during this investigative process reflected capabilities that had been developed through years of medical training and practice, but had remained largely untested outside of professional contexts. The same determination that had enabled me to complete surgical residency and build a successful medical career now supported my commitment to methodically exposing every aspect of David's elaborate deception and ensuring accountability for the harm he had inflicted upon our family. The weight of evidence I had accumulated against David demanded immediate action, yet my initial attempts to engage established authorities with this information revealed the first of many obstacles that would test my determination to expose his deception. My medical background had instilled confidence in systematic processes and institutional reliability, assumptions that prove naive when confronted with the complex realities of investigating sophisticated financial fraud. My first contact with law enforcement came through Detective Sarah Martinez at the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Division, a unit I had assumed would welcome clear evidence of insurance fraud and fake death. Detective Martinez received my carefully organized documentation with professional courtesy, but her initial response revealed the practical limitations that constrained police investigations of crimes that crossed multiple jurisdictions and involved international elements. Mrs. Vasquez, Detective Martinez explained during our first meeting, the evidence you've presented suggests serious criminal activity, but the jurisdiction issues alone create significant challenges for local law enforcement. Your husband's supposed death occurred in Michigan, his current location appears to be in the Caribbean, and the insurance companies involved operate under federal regulations. Each of these factors complicates our ability to initiate immediate action. The bureaucratic complexity that Detective Martinez described contradicted my expectations that clear evidence would prompt swift investigation and resolution. The jurisdictional boundaries that separated local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies created procedural requirements that prioritized administrative coordination over rapid response to documented crimes. The international elements of David's deception introduced additional layers of complexity involving federal agencies whose cooperation required formal requests and extended processing periods. Detective Martinez also explained that insurance fraud investigations typically originated with the insurance companies themselves, rather than external complaints from affected parties. This procedural preference meant that my evidence needed to be presented to the insurance providers, who would process David's death claims, before law enforcement agencies would prioritize investigation of potential criminal activity. The circular nature of this requirement frustrated my desire for immediate action while highlighting my inexperience with the practical realities of financial crime prosecution. My subsequent contact with Consolidated Life Insurance Company, the primary provider of David's life insurance coverage, introduced me to additional obstacles that tested my patience and resolve. The customer service representative who initially received my call expressed skepticism about my claims and insisted that all communications regarding potential fraud must be submitted through formal written channels with supporting documentation that met specific evidentiary standards. The insurance company's fraud investigation department, headed by Senior Investigator Robert Chen, approached my evidence with professional caution that reflected their experience with false accusations and mistaken identity cases. Mr. Chen explained that insurance fraud investigations required extensive verification procedures designed to protect both the company's interests and the rights of policyholders who might be subject to unfounded allegations. Insurance fraud allegations require extraordinary substantiation, Mr. Chen informed me during our telephone conversation. The photograph you describe, while potentially significant, represents only a single piece of evidence that must be corroborated through multiple independent sources. Our investigation protocols require verification of identity, location, timing, and circumstances before we can conclude that fraud has occurred. The methodical approach that Mr. Chen described aligned with my medical training and systematic diagnoses, yet the extended timeline he projected for completing their investigation created frustration, as I contemplated David's continued freedom to enjoy the proceeds of his deception. The insurance company's internal procedures prioritized accuracy over speed, a reasonable approach that nonetheless conflicted with my urgency to prevent further harm to my family and to recover the financial resources that had been stolen through fraudulent claims. Mr. Chen also explained that insurance companies maintained sophisticated relationships with law enforcement agencies but exercise discretion about when to involve criminal investigators in their internal fraud examinations. This discretion reflected their preference for resolving questionable claims through civil procedures rather than criminal prosecution, an approach that minimized legal costs while achieving recovery of fraudulent payments through less complex administrative processes. The legal consultation I sought with attorney Patricia Williams, who specialized in insurance fraud and financial crimes, provided additional perspective on the challenges that confronted my efforts to expose David's deception. Attorney Williams reviewed my documentation with professional expertise and confirmed that the evidence I had assembled provided a strong foundation for both criminal charges and civil recovery actions. However, Attorney Williams also explained that successful prosecution of sophisticated fraud cases required resources and expertise that exceeded the capabilities of most individual plaintiffs. The international elements of David's deception, the complexity of financial transactions involved in his scheme, and the technical requirements for documenting criminal activity demanded coordination between multiple legal professionals and investigative specialists whose services required substantial financial investment. The strength of your evidence is impressive, Attorney Williams acknowledged, but converting this information into successful legal action will require significant time and financial resources. Criminal prosecution depends on law enforcement priorities and prosecutorial discretion that you cannot control directly. Civil recovery actions offer more direct control over the process but require upfront investment in legal fees and investigative costs that may exceed your current financial capacity. The financial constraints that Attorney Williams identified highlighted the cruel irony of my situation. David's fraud had created the very financial limitations that complicated my ability to pursue legal remedies for his crimes. The resources required for comprehensive legal action exceeded my current income and savings, while the assets that might have funded such action had been stolen through the fraudulent activities I sought to expose. Attorney Williams suggested alternative approaches that might achieve partial success within my financial constraints, including coordination with insurance company investigations that could reduce duplicated effort and expense. However, these compromise solutions required accepting reduced control over the investigation timeline and potentially limiting the scope of recovery actions that might be pursued against David and his assets. My attempts to engage federal authorities through the Federal Bureau of Investigation revealed additional obstacles related to case prioritization and resource allocation. The FBI's Financial Crimes Section maintained responsibility for investigating complex fraud cases that cross state and international boundaries, but their caseload demanded triage decisions that prioritized investigations based on financial impact, public safety concerns, and likelihood of successful prosecution. Special Agent Michael Rodriguez, who reviewed my case materials during a preliminary consultation, explained that federal agencies received thousands of fraud complaints annually, but possessed resources to pursue full investigations in only a fraction of these cases. The selection criteria that guided their prioritization decisions emphasized cases involving multiple victims, substantial financial losses, and criminal organizations whose activities threatened broader public interests. Your case involves sophisticated criminal activity with clear evidence of fraud, Agent Rodriguez acknowledged, but the single-victim nature of the crimes and the international elements that complicate prosecution place it in a category that competes with numerous similar cases for our limited investigative resources. Federal prosecution requires reasonable assurance of conviction, which depends on our ability to locate and apprehend the defendant and to satisfy complex evidentiary requirements. The resource limitations that Agent Rodriguez described reflected systemic challenges in law enforcement that prioritized cases with maximum public impact over individual grievances, regardless of the strength of available evidence. The mathematical reality of limited investigative capacity versus unlimited criminal activity meant that many legitimate complaints could not receive full attention from federal authorities, leaving victims dependent on alternative remedies that might be less effective or comprehensive. Agent Rodriguez also explained that international cooperation required formal treaty procedures and diplomatic coordination that extended investigation timelines significantly. The Caribbean location where David appeared to be residing maintained sovereignty over its territory that limited direct action by United States law enforcement agencies. Extradition procedures required extensive documentation and diplomatic negotiation that could extend for months or years without guaranteeing successful outcomes. The challenges I encountered during these initial contacts with established authorities revealed fundamental limitations in systems that had appeared reliable and responsive from the outside. The bureaucratic complexity that constrained law enforcement response, the procedural caution that delayed insurance company action, and the resource limitations that restricted federal investigation created a landscape where clear evidence of criminal activity did not automatically trigger swift justice. These systemic obstacles tested my resolve and forced me to confront the possibility that traditional remedies might prove inadequate for addressing David's sophisticated deception. The institutional processes that I had expected to provide resolution instead revealed themselves as complex systems with their own priorities and limitations that might not align with my urgent need for accountability and recovery. The frustration I experienced during this phase of my efforts reflected not only personal disappointment, but also growing awareness that achieving justice for David's crimes might require approaches that extended beyond formal legal channels. The evidence I had documented remained compelling, but converting this evidence into meaningful consequences for David would demand strategies that circumvented or supplemented the limitations of established authorities. My medical training had emphasized working within established protocols and institutional frameworks, approaches that had served me well in professional contexts where systematic procedures produced reliable outcomes. However, the financial fraud that David had perpetrated operated in spaces where traditional remedies proved inadequate, requiring adaptive strategies that challenged my comfort with conventional approaches to problem solving. The determination that sustained me through these initial setbacks derived from recognition that accepting the limitations of established systems would mean accepting David's success in escaping consequences for his deliberate infliction of suffering upon our family. The obstacles I had encountered represented challenges to overcome, rather than reasons to abandon pursuit of accountability and justice. The strength I discovered within myself during this phase of resistance and setbacks reflected capabilities that had been developed through years of managing difficult medical cases, where standard treatments proved insufficient. The same persistence that had enabled me to find solutions for complex surgical challenges would now support my commitment to developing alternative strategies for exposing David's deception and recovering what he had stolen from our family through his elaborate fraud. The limitations I had encountered with established authorities compelled me to pursue independent investigation strategies that revealed additional layers of David's deception, far more extensive than I had initially comprehended. Each new discovery expanded the scope of his fraud, while simultaneously creating additional obstacles that tested my determination to expose the full extent of his criminal activities and their impact on our family and others. My decision to engage private investigator Marcus Thompson represented a significant financial commitment that required careful consideration given my constrained resources. Yet the expertise he provided proved invaluable in uncovering elements of David's scheme that had remained hidden from conventional investigation methods. Thompson's background in corporate fraud investigation and international asset recovery provided capabilities that complemented my medical training in systematic analysis while addressing the technical and jurisdictional challenges that had frustrated my initial efforts. Thompson's preliminary investigation confirmed my suspicions that David's deception extended far beyond simple insurance fraud to encompass a comprehensive financial crime scheme involving multiple false identities, sophisticated money laundering operations, and coordination with criminal networks specializing in identity theft and document forgery. The Caribbean location where David had been photographed served as headquarters for an international operation that facilitated similar fraudulent activities for other individuals seeking to escape legal and financial obligations through faked deaths and false identities. The revelation that David was not acting independently but rather as part of an organized criminal enterprise fundamentally altered my understanding of the challenges involved in exposing his activities and recovering stolen assets. Thompson explained that dismantling such operations required extensive investigation and coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies, processes that could extend for years while enabling continued criminal activity by all participants in the network. Thompson's investigation also revealed that David had been preparation for his fraudulent death scheme for approximately 3 years before its execution, a timeline that predated many of the financial difficulties he had reported to me, and suggested that his deception had been motivated by greed rather than genuine business failures. The systematic nature of his preparations included establishing false identities, creating offshore financial accounts, and developing relationships with criminal service providers who specialized in facilitating fraudulent disappearances. During this extended preparation period, David had gradually transferred substantial assets to accounts under his false identities, while simultaneously creating artificial debts and financial obligations that would consume his legitimate estate following his supposed death. This sophisticated asset concealment strategy enabled him to maintain substantial wealth, while creating the appearance of financial insolvency that justified liquidating family assets and eliminating support obligations to his dependents. Thompson's investigation uncovered evidence that David had been systematically documenting our family's activities and financial circumstances following his supposed death, information that he had been sharing with his criminal associates for purposes that remained unclear but suggested potential future threats to our safety and security. This surveillance activity indicated that David's deception involved ongoing criminal activities rather than a completed fraud that had achieved its intended objectives. The documentation Thompson recovered revealed that David had been monitoring my investigation efforts from the beginning, with detailed reports about my contacts with law enforcement agencies, insurance companies, and legal professionals. This intelligence-gathering operation suggested that David and his associates possessed sophisticated capabilities for tracking law enforcement activities and might be prepared to take defensive actions if my investigation threatened their continued criminal operations. Thompson also discovered that the criminal network supporting David's fraudulent activities maintained extensive resources for intimidating and discouraging individuals who posed threats to their operations. These resources included legal harassment through frivolous litigation, financial sabotage through identity theft and credit manipulation, and more direct intimidation tactics that had been employed against other fraud victims who had attempted to expose similar schemes. The implications of these discoveries created new concerns about the potential risks my investigation might pose to my children's safety and our family's security. The recognition that David was connected to criminal organizations with demonstrated capabilities for retaliation forced me to reconsider my approach and implement security measures that I had never previously imagined would be necessary in my suburban medical practice environment. My consultation with security specialist Linda Chang, whom Thompson recommended for protecting families threatened by sophisticated criminal organizations, revealed the extent of precautions necessary when confronting well-resourced criminal networks. Chang's assessment of our vulnerability identified numerous security gaps in our current living arrangements and daily routines that created opportunities for surveillance, harassment, or more serious threats to our safety. Chang's security recommendations required substantial modifications to our lifestyle and significant financial investments in protective measures that further strained our already limited resources. These recommendations included relocating to a secure apartment complex with controlled access, installing comprehensive security systems, modifying our daily routines to avoid predictable patterns, and maintaining constant awareness of potential surveillance or other threatening activities. The financial burden of implementing necessary security measures created additional pressure on our family budget, while highlighting the ongoing costs that David's criminal activities continued to impose upon our daily lives. The resources required for protective measures reduced funds available for the children's activities and educational opportunities, creating another dimension of harm that David's deception had inflicted upon our family's future prospects. Thompson's continued investigation revealed that David's criminal network had defrauded multiple insurance companies of several $1,000,000 through similar faked death schemes, involving other individuals who had disappeared to Caribbean locations under false identities. This pattern suggested that exposing David's individual case might contribute to dismantling a broader criminal enterprise that was causing substantial harm to insurance systems and other fraud victims. However, Thompson also warned that the scope and sophistication of the criminal network created significant dangers for individuals who attempted to expose their operations without adequate protection and professional support. The resources available to these criminal organizations exceeded the capabilities of individual victims and required coordination with federal law enforcement agencies that possessed appropriate jurisdiction and investigative resources. The evidence Thompson had gathered documented not only David's individual crimes, but also the structure and operations of the broader criminal network that had facilitated his fraudulent activities. This information provided valuable intelligence that could support federal prosecutions of the entire organization, but leveraging this evidence effectively required sophisticated legal strategies and extensive cooperation with law enforcement agencies. Thompson's investigation also uncovered evidence that David had been planning additional fraudulent activities that would expand the scope of his criminal enterprises while creating greater financial losses for insurance companies and other victims. These planned activities included recruiting additional participants for faked death schemes and establishing new operational bases in countries with even more favorable conditions for criminal activity and asset concealment. The recognition that David's criminal activities were expanding rather than concluding created urgency around exposing his deception before additional victims suffered similar harm to what my family had experienced. The moral imperative to prevent future crimes provided additional motivation for continuing my investigation, despite the personal risks and financial costs involved in confronting sophisticated criminal organizations. My growing understanding of the broader criminal network that had enabled David's fraud also revealed potential allies among other fraud victims who had been similarly deceived and might be willing to coordinate efforts to expose the operations that had harmed multiple families. Thompson identified several other cases involving suspected faked deaths and fraudulent insurance claims that appeared connected to the same criminal organization. The prospect of coordinating with other fraud victims offered possibilities for sharing investigation costs and combining evidence that might create stronger cases for law enforcement action while reducing individual exposure to retaliation from criminal networks. However, coordinating such efforts required careful planning and security measures to protect all participants from potential threats while maintaining the integrity of evidence collection and documentation. The complexity of coordinating multi-victim investigations while maintaining security and legal effectiveness demanded professional guidance that exceeded my individual capabilities and resources. The recognition that achieving justice for David's crimes required collaboration with other victims and professional specialists challenged my initial assumption that individual determination and systematic investigation would be sufficient to expose his deception and recover stolen assets. Thompson's investigation had also revealed that successful prosecution of the criminal network would likely require international cooperation and diplomatic coordination that could extend investigation timelines significantly, while creating opportunities for criminal organizations to modify their operations or relocate to even more secure jurisdictions. These challenges highlighted the sophisticated nature of modern financial crimes and the limitations of traditional law enforcement approaches. The evidence Thompson had assembled created a comprehensive picture of criminal activities that extended far beyond David's individual case, while demonstrating the systematic nature of fraudulent operations that threatened insurance systems and caused substantial harm to multiple victims. However, converting this evidence into meaningful legal action required resources and expertise that continued to exceed my individual capabilities despite the strength of available documentation. The determination that sustained my investigation through these increasingly complex revelations derived from recognition that David's crimes represented not only personal betrayal but participation in systematic criminal activities that threatened other families and undermined legitimate financial institutions. The evidence I had helped gather might contribute to preventing future crimes and achieving justice for multiple victims if it could be effectively presented to appropriate authorities with adequate resources for comprehensive prosecution. The breakthrough in my investigation came through an unexpected source that fundamentally altered my approach to exposing David's criminal network and provided access to resources and expertise that had previously seemed beyond my reach. The contact arrived through Dr. Harrison's forensic consulting practice in the form of Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Rebecca Morrison, who had been conducting a parallel investigation into the same criminal organization that had facilitated David's fraudulent disappearance. Agent Morrison's initial contact was prompted by the evidence I had submitted through Dr. Harrison's analysis, which had been forwarded to federal authorities as part of a broader investigation into sophisticated insurance fraud schemes operating in the Caribbean region. Her recognition of the connection between David's case and their ongoing federal investigation created an opportunity for collaboration that promised to overcome many of the jurisdictional and resource limitations that had previously frustrated my efforts. During our first meeting at the Federal Building in downtown Chicago, Agent Morrison explained that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been tracking the criminal network responsible for David's fraudulent death scheme for approximately 2 years as part of a comprehensive investigation codenamed Operation Ghost Harbor. This investigation had identified multiple participants in fraudulent death schemes that had collectively defrauded insurance companies of over $30 million, while enabling dozens of individuals to escape legal and financial obligations through sophisticated identity fraud operations. Agent Morrison's explanation of Operation Ghost Harbor revealed that my individual investigation had uncovered evidence that complemented and enhanced their federal investigation in ways that could significantly strengthen their ability to prosecute the entire criminal network. The detailed documentation I had assembled regarding David's activities provided insider perspective and specific evidence that filled gaps in their broader investigation while offering opportunities for coordinated action that could achieve comprehensive results. The federal investigation had identified the Caribbean operation as a sophisticated criminal enterprise that provided comprehensive services for individuals seeking to escape legal obligations through fraudulent deaths and false identity creation. These services included document forgery, financial laundering, surveillance evasion, and coordination with corrupt officials in multiple jurisdictions who facilitated the administrative processing necessary to legitimize fraudulent deaths and identity changes. Agent Morrison's background in financial crimes investigation and international criminal organizations provided expertise that addressed many of the challenges I had encountered during my independent investigation efforts. Her access to federal resources, international cooperation agreements, and sophisticated investigative technologies offered capabilities that far exceeded what I could achieve through private investigation services, regardless of the financial resources I might be able to commit to such efforts. The federal investigation had been constrained by the difficulty of obtaining evidence from within the criminal organization's operations, as their sophisticated security measures and careful recruitment practices prevented traditional undercover operations from gaining access to internal communications and documentation. My position as a fraud victim with detailed knowledge of David's activities provided a unique opportunity for federal investigators to obtain insider intelligence that could support more effective prosecution strategies. Agent Morrison proposed a collaboration arrangement that would enable me to contribute to the federal investigation while receiving protection and support that addressed the security concerns that had emerged from my independent investigation activities. This collaboration would involve my continued evidence gathering under federal supervision and protection, with coordination designed to maximize the effectiveness of both individual and collective prosecution efforts against all participants in the criminal network. The prospect of federal collaboration offered solutions to many of the obstacles that had frustrated my individual investigation efforts, while providing access to resources and expertise that could achieve comprehensive justice for David's crimes and those of his criminal associates. However, Agent Morrison also explained that federal investigations operated under different timelines and priorities than individual legal actions, requiring patience and flexibility that might delay immediate personal remedies while pursuing broader criminal justice objectives. Agent Morrison's assessment of the evidence I had assembled confirmed that my documentation provided crucial intelligence that strengthened their ability to understand and prosecute the criminal network's operations. The systematic approach I had developed for documenting David's activities aligned well with federal evidence requirements and provided a foundation for expanding their investigation into areas that had previously been inaccessible through traditional law enforcement methods. The federal investigation had identified connections between the Caribbean operation and similar criminal networks operating in other international jurisdictions, suggesting that dismantling David's organization could contribute to disrupting global financial crime systems that affected thousands of victims worldwide. This broader impact potential provided additional motivation for collaboration, while highlighting the significance of the evidence I had gathered through my individual investigation efforts. Agent Morrison also explained that federal prosecution of sophisticated financial crime organizations required extensive preparation and coordination that often extended for months or years before arrests and indictments could be executed. This timeline reflected the complexity of gathering sufficient evidence for conviction while coordinating international cooperation and ensuring that prosecution efforts achieved maximum impact against all participants in criminal networks. The security protocols that Agent Morrison outlined for protecting my family during our collaboration with federal investigators provided comprehensive protection measures that addressed the concerns that had emerged from Thompson's security assessment. These protocols included federal surveillance protection, secure communication systems, and contingency plans for relocating our family if threats escalated beyond manageable levels during the investigation period. Agent Morrison's explanation of federal victim protection programs revealed additional resources that could support our family's financial stability during the extended investigation period, while ensuring that David's continued criminal activities could not further harm our economic circumstances. These programs included provisions for emergency financial assistance, legal support services, and counseling resources that address the psychological impact of extended involvement in complex criminal investigations. The collaborative investigation framework that Agent Morrison proposed would enable me to maintain involvement in pursuing justice for David's crimes, while contributing to broader efforts that could prevent similar fraud schemes from victimizing other families. This approach aligned with my professional background in collaborative medical practice while offering opportunities for meaningful impact that extended beyond individual revenge or financial recovery. Agent Morrison's assessment of the criminal network's vulnerabilities identified several strategic opportunities for disruption that could be enhanced through coordinated action between federal investigation and the evidence-gathering capabilities I had demonstrated during my independent investigation. These opportunities included exploiting the organization's reliance on electronic communications that could be intercepted through federal surveillance authorities and leveraging their financial transaction patterns that created exposure to asset forfeiture procedures. The federal investigation had also identified other fraud victims who had been affected by the same criminal network and might be willing to coordinate their efforts with federal prosecution activities. Agent Morrison explained that victim coordination often strengthened federal cases while providing mutual support and resource sharing that enhanced individual recovery prospects for all participants in collaborative prosecution efforts. Agent Morrison's professional demeanor and comprehensive understanding of the challenges involved in prosecuting sophisticated financial crimes provided reassurance that federal collaboration offered realistic prospects for achieving meaningful justice for David's crimes. Her acknowledgement of the emotional and practical difficulties involved in extended criminal investigations demonstrated sensitivity to victim concerns while maintaining focus on achieving comprehensive prosecution results. The decision to accept Agent Morrison's collaboration proposal represented a fundamental shift in my approach, from individual investigation to participation in federal law enforcement activities that offered greater resources and broader impact potential, while requiring acceptance of federal priorities and timelines. This transition challenged my desire for immediate control over investigation activities, while offering access to capabilities that far exceeded what I could achieve through independent efforts. Agent Morrison explained that federal collaboration would require my continued evidence gathering and documentation under federal supervision, with specific protocols for sharing information and coordinating activities that maximized investigation effectiveness while protecting operational security. These requirements aligned well with my systematic approach to documentation while providing professional guidance that could enhance the legal effectiveness of evidence collection activities. The prospect of contributing to federal prosecution efforts that could achieve comprehensive justice for David's crimes while preventing similar fraud schemes from victimizing other families provided motivation that transcended personal revenge or financial recovery concerns. This broader impact potential offered meaning and purpose that transformed my individual pursuit of justice into participation in collective efforts to combat sophisticated financial crime systems. Agent Morrison's collaboration proposal also included provisions for coordinating with insurance company investigations and civil recovery actions that could achieve financial restoration for our family while supporting federal criminal prosecution efforts. This coordination offered prospects for addressing both criminal justice and financial recovery objectives through integrated legal strategies that maximized effectiveness across multiple legal proceedings. The comprehensive briefing that Agent Morrison provided during our second meeting revealed the staggering scope of systemic vulnerabilities within financial and legal institutions that enabled sophisticated criminal organizations to operate with relative impunity across international boundaries. The criminal network that had facilitated David's fraudulent death represented merely one component of a global infrastructure designed to exploit regulatory gaps and jurisdictional limitations that created opportunities for massive financial crimes. Agent Morrison's presentation of Operation Ghost Harbor's findings demonstrated that the Caribbean-based organization had been operating successfully for over 8 years, during which time they had facilitated fraudulent deaths for approximately 200 individuals who collectively owed over $400 million in legal judgments, tax obligations, and family support commitments. These statistics revealed that David's case represented a small fraction of a systematic assault on financial and legal systems that affected thousands of victims worldwide. The sophistication of the criminal organization's operations exceeded anything I had initially comprehended, involving coordination between corrupt officials in multiple countries, sophisticated money laundering networks that moved billions of dollars annually, and document forgery operations that produced identification materials virtually indistinguishable from legitimate government-issued documents. The infrastructure required to support such operations indicated criminal enterprises with resources and capabilities that rivaled legitimate multinational corporations. Agent Morrison explained that the regulatory framework governing international financial transactions contained numerous gaps that criminal organizations exploited systematically to move assets beyond the reach of law enforcement agencies and civil courts. These gaps resulted from the complexity of coordinating financial regulations across multiple sovereign jurisdictions, each with different legal systems, reporting requirements, and cooperation agreements that created opportunities for sophisticated criminals to exploit inconsistencies and limitations. The investigation had revealed that legitimate financial institutions unknowingly facilitated criminal activities through standard business practices that did not adequately verify the authenticity of customer documentation or the legitimacy of international transfers that appeared to comply with technical requirements while serving criminal purposes. The volume of international financial transactions and the complexity of verification procedures created practical limitations that criminal organizations exploited through carefully structured activities that mimicked legitimate business operations. Agent Morrison's analysis of the broader financial crime landscape revealed that fraudulent death schemes represented one component of diversified criminal portfolios that included tax evasion services, asset concealment strategies, and identity fraud operations that collectively generated hundreds of millions of dollars annually for criminal organizations. The systematic nature of these operations indicated criminal enterprises that operated with business-like efficiency and strategic planning that enabled sustained profitability over extended periods. The law enforcement challenges that Agent Morrison described highlighted fundamental limitations in international cooperation mechanisms that constrained efforts to combat sophisticated financial crimes. These limitations included differences in legal systems that complicated evidence sharing, jurisdictional boundaries that enabled criminals to exploit regulatory gaps, and resource constraints that prevented comprehensive investigation of criminal networks that operated across multiple countries simultaneously. Agent Morrison also revealed that the criminal organization had been systematically corrupting officials within legitimate institutions to facilitate their fraudulent activities and protect their operations from law enforcement scrutiny. This corruption extended beyond obvious targets such as document clerks and immigration officials to include individuals within insurance companies, law enforcement agencies, and financial institutions, who provided intelligence about investigations and administrative support for criminal activities. The investigation had documented extensive surveillance and intelligence gathering operations that criminal organizations conducted against law enforcement agencies, potential victims, and anyone who posed threats to their continued operations. These surveillance activities utilized sophisticated technology and professional personnel that enabled criminal organizations to monitor law enforcement activities and adjust their operations to avoid detection and prosecution. Agent Morrison's briefing revealed that the criminal network had been actively expanding their operations into new jurisdictions and developing additional service offerings that increased their profitability while reducing their exposure to law enforcement action. These expansion efforts included establishing operations in countries with even more favorable regulatory environments, and developing new fraud schemes that exploited emerging vulnerabilities in digital financial systems and electronic identity verification procedures. The scale of corruption that enabled criminal operations to function effectively across multiple jurisdictions indicated systemic problems within international financial and legal systems that extended far beyond individual criminal organizations. Agent Morrison explained that addressing these problems required comprehensive reforms of international cooperation mechanisms, regulatory frameworks, and institutional practices that created opportunities for criminal exploitation. The investigation had also revealed connections between the Caribbean-based criminal organization and other international criminal networks that specialized in different types of financial crimes, but shared resources and intelligence that enhanced their collective capabilities. These connections indicated criminal ecosystems that operated with coordination and sophistication that enabled them to adapt rapidly to law enforcement countermeasures while maintaining profitability across diverse criminal activities. Agent Morrison's analysis of victim impacts revealed that fraudulent death schemes created cascading consequences that extended far beyond immediate financial losses, to include psychological trauma for family members, disruption of children's education and development, and long-term economic disadvantages that affected victims for years after the initial crimes. These broader impacts highlighted the humanitarian dimensions of financial crimes that often received insufficient attention in discussions focused primarily on monetary losses. The investigation had documented systematic efforts by criminal organizations to intimidate and discourage victims who attempted to expose fraudulent activities or recover stolen assets. These intimidation efforts included legal harassment through frivolous litigation, financial sabotage through identity theft and credit manipulation, and direct threats that escalated based on the perceived threat that victims posed to criminal operations. Agent Morrison explained that successful prosecution of sophisticated financial crime networks required addressing not only the criminal activities themselves, but also the systemic vulnerabilities that enabled such operations to function effectively. This comprehensive approach demanded coordination between law enforcement agencies, regulatory authorities, and international cooperation mechanisms that could address structural problems while pursuing individual criminal cases. The federal investigation had identified opportunities for legislative and regulatory reforms that could reduce vulnerabilities that criminal organizations exploited, while maintaining the flexibility and efficiency that legitimate international financial systems required for normal business operations. These reform opportunities included enhanced verification procedures for international transfers, improved coordination between regulatory agencies across jurisdictions, and strengthened penalties for officials who facilitated criminal activities. Agent Morrison's assessment of the criminal organization's financial resources revealed that they maintained substantial assets that could be subject to forfeiture procedures if successful prosecutions could be achieved. These assets included real estate holdings in multiple countries, financial accounts in various jurisdictions, and business investments that generated ongoing income for criminal operations while providing opportunities for law enforcement asset recovery. The investigation had also documented the criminal organization's recruitment and training procedures for new participants in fraudulent death schemes, revealing systematic approaches to identifying potential clients and providing comprehensive support services that enabled successful completion of fraudulent disappearances. These procedures indicated criminal operations with institutional knowledge and operational sophistication that enabled sustained success over extended periods. Agent Morrison explained that dismantling such sophisticated criminal organizations required comprehensive strategies that addressed all aspects of their operations simultaneously to prevent key participants from escaping prosecution or relocating their activities to alternative jurisdictions. This comprehensive approach demanded extensive coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies and sustained effort over extended periods to achieve meaningful results. The revelation of these deeper systemic issues transformed my understanding of David's crimes, from individual betrayal to participation in organized criminal activities that threatened the integrity of financial and legal systems, while causing substantial harm to thousands of victims worldwide. This broader perspective provided additional motivation for continued collaboration with federal authorities, while highlighting the significance of my individual case within larger efforts to combat sophisticated financial crimes. The recognition that exposing David's deception could contribute to addressing systemic problems that enabled similar crimes against other families provided meaning and purpose that transcended personal revenge or financial recovery objectives. This broader impact potential offered opportunities for meaningful contribution to criminal justice efforts that could prevent future victimization while achieving accountability for past crimes. Agent Morrison's comprehensive analysis of the criminal organization's operations and their broader implications for financial crime prevention provided context that elevated my individual pursuit of justice into participation in efforts to protect society from sophisticated criminal threats. This transformation from personal grievance to public service aligned with my professional background in medical practice while offering opportunities for meaningful impact that extended far beyond individual circumstances. Agent Morrison's extensive experience in dismantling sophisticated criminal organizations provided invaluable guidance that fundamentally transformed my approach to exposing David's deception while protecting my family from the substantial risks associated with confronting international criminal networks. Her systematic methodology for conducting complex investigations offered strategic frameworks that addressed both immediate tactical challenges and long-term objectives for achieving comprehensive justice. During our third meeting, Agent Morrison outlined the essential principles that govern successful investigations of organized financial crime, emphasizing that effective action required careful balance between aggressive pursuit of evidence and prudent protection of investigators and their families. Her explanation of investigative strategy revealed that hasty or emotionally driven actions often compromised cases by alerting criminal organizations to law enforcement interest, while failing to gather sufficient evidence for successful prosecutions. Agent Morrison's first strategic principle emphasized the critical importance of maintaining operational security throughout all investigation activities to prevent criminal organizations from detecting law enforcement interest and implementing countermeasures that could obstruct justice efforts. This operational security required careful management of communications, systematic protection of evidence, and strategic timing of investigative actions that prevented criminals from anticipating and responding to law enforcement activities. The communication protocols that Agent Morrison established for our collaboration utilized secure federal systems that prevented interception by criminal surveillance operations, while enabling coordinated action between multiple law enforcement agencies involved in Operation Ghost Harbor. These protocols included encrypted communication channels, secure document transfer procedures, and carefully controlled information sharing that protected investigative integrity while facilitating effective collaboration. Agent Morrison explained that criminal organizations possessed sophisticated intelligence-gathering capabilities that enabled them to monitor law enforcement activities and identify threats to their operations through surveillance of communications, financial transactions, and behavioral patterns that might indicate investigative interest. Understanding these criminal capabilities required investigators to modify their normal activities and implement security measures that prevented detection while maintaining effectiveness in evidence gathering. The strategic framework that Agent Morrison outlined for exposing David's criminal network emphasized systematic documentation of evidence that satisfied federal prosecution requirements, while building comprehensive cases against all participants in criminal operations. This systematic approach required patience and methodical attention to detail that ensured evidence collection activities contributed to broader prosecution objectives rather than merely addressing individual grievances. Agent Morrison's guidance regarding evidence collection emphasized the importance of maintaining chain of custody procedures that ensured admissibility in federal court proceedings, while protecting evidence from challenges that criminal defense attorneys typically employed to exclude documentation that might support successful prosecutions. These procedures required careful attention to documentation standards and handling protocols that preserved evidence integrity throughout extended investigation periods. The strategic timing principles that Agent Morrison explained revealed that premature disclosure of evidence or investigative activities often enabled criminal organizations to modify their operations, destroy incriminating materials, or relocate key personnel to jurisdictions that complicated prosecution efforts. Effective investigation strategy required coordinated timing that maximized evidence collection while minimizing opportunities for criminal countermeasures. Agent Morrison also provided guidance regarding the psychological challenges that extended investigations posed for victims and their families, acknowledging that collaboration with federal authorities required emotional resilience and practical flexibility that could be difficult to maintain over extended periods. Her experience with similar cases enabled her to offer strategies for managing stress and uncertainty while maintaining focus on long-term objectives. The protection strategies that Agent Morrison outlined for my family addressed both immediate security concerns and long-term safety considerations that extended beyond the completion of criminal prosecutions. These strategies recognized that sophisticated criminal organizations often maintained capabilities for retaliation against witnesses and victims even after successful prosecutions, requiring ongoing vigilance and protective measures that became integrated into normal life patterns. Agent Morrison explained that federal witness protection programs provided comprehensive support for individuals whose testimony was essential for prosecuting organized criminal enterprises, but that such programs required significant lifestyle modifications that affected all aspects of daily existence. Her assessment of our family's circumstances indicated that full witness protection might not be necessary if appropriate security measures were implemented and maintained throughout the investigation period. The collaborative investigation framework that Agent Morrison proposed enabled me to contribute meaningfully to federal prosecution efforts while receiving professional guidance that enhanced the effectiveness of my evidence-gathering activities. This collaboration utilized my unique position as an insider with detailed knowledge of David's activities, while providing federal resources and expertise that addressed limitations in my independent investigation capabilities. Agent Morrison's analysis of David's psychological profile provided insights that informed strategic approaches for gathering additional evidence and potentially persuading him to cooperate with federal authorities in exchange for reduced charges. Her experience with similar cases suggested that individuals who participated in fraudulent death schemes often experienced psychological stress that created vulnerabilities that skilled investigators could exploit through carefully managed contact and negotiation strategies. The financial investigation techniques that Agent Morrison described revealed sophisticated methods for tracing assets that had been concealed through complex international transactions and shell company structures. These techniques utilized federal authority to access financial records and coordinate with international banking authorities in ways that exceeded the capabilities of private investigation services while providing comprehensive understanding of criminal financial operations. Agent Morrison explained that successful prosecution of sophisticated financial crime organizations required not only evidence of criminal activities but also demonstration of criminal intent and systematic coordination that distinguished organized crime from individual mistakes or isolated incidents. This evidentiary standard demanded comprehensive documentation that revealed patterns of criminal behavior and institutional coordination that supported serious federal charges. The international cooperation mechanisms that Agent Morrison described provided access to evidence and investigative resources in Caribbean jurisdictions where David and his criminal associates maintained operations. Agent Morrison also explained that federal prosecution of sophisticated financial crime organizations required extensive preparation and coordination that often extended for months or years before arrests and indictments could be executed. This timeline reflected the complexity of gathering sufficient evidence for conviction while coordinating international cooperation and ensuring that prosecution efforts achieved maximum impact against all participants in criminal networks. The security protocols that Agent Morrison outlined for protecting my family during our collaboration with federal investigators provided comprehensive protection measures that addressed the concerns that had emerged from Thompson's security assessment. These protocols included federal surveillance protection, secure communication systems, and contingency plans for relocating our family if threats escalated beyond manageable levels during the investigation period. Agent Morrison's explanation of federal victim protection programs revealed additional resources that could support our family's financial stability during the extended investigation period, while ensuring that David's continued criminal activities could not further harm our economic circumstances. These programs included provisions for emergency financial assistance, legal support services, and counseling resources that address the psychological impact of extended involvement in complex criminal investigations. The collaborative investigation framework that Agent Morrison proposed would enable me to maintain involvement in pursuing justice for David's crimes, while contributing to broader efforts that could prevent similar fraud schemes from victimizing other families. This approach aligned with my professional background in collaborative medical practice while offering opportunities for meaningful impact that extended beyond individual revenge or financial recovery. Agent Morrison's assessment of the criminal network's vulnerabilities identified several strategic opportunities for disruption that could be enhanced through coordinated action between federal investigation and the evidence-gathering capabilities I had demonstrated during my independent investigation. These opportunities included exploiting the organization's reliance on electronic communications that could be intercepted through federal surveillance authorities and leveraging their financial transaction patterns that created exposure to asset forfeiture procedures. The federal investigation had also identified other fraud victims who had been affected by the same criminal network and might be willing to coordinate their efforts with federal prosecution activities. Agent Morrison explained that victim coordination often strengthened federal cases while providing mutual support and resource sharing that enhanced individual recovery prospects for all participants in collaborative prosecution efforts. Agent Morrison's professional demeanor and comprehensive understanding of the challenges involved in prosecuting sophisticated financial crimes provided reassurance that federal collaboration offered realistic prospects for achieving meaningful justice for David's crimes. Her acknowledgement of the emotional and practical difficulties involved in extended criminal investigations demonstrated sensitivity to victim concerns while maintaining focus on achieving comprehensive prosecution results. The decision to accept Agent Morrison's collaboration proposal represented a fundamental shift in my approach, from individual investigation to participation in federal law enforcement activities that offered greater resources and broader impact potential, while requiring acceptance of federal priorities and timelines. This transition challenged my desire for immediate control over investigation activities, while offering access to capabilities that far exceeded what I could achieve through independent efforts. Agent Morrison explained that federal collaboration would require my continued evidence gathering and documentation under federal supervision, with specific protocols for sharing information and coordinating activities that maximized investigation effectiveness while protecting operational security. These requirements aligned well with my systematic approach to documentation while providing professional guidance that could enhance the legal effectiveness of evidence collection activities. The prospect of contributing to federal prosecution efforts that could achieve comprehensive justice for David's crimes while preventing similar fraud schemes from victimizing other families provided motivation that transcended personal revenge or financial recovery concerns. This broader impact potential offered meaning and purpose that transformed my individual pursuit of justice into participation in collective efforts to combat sophisticated financial crime systems. The financial analysis revealed that David's preparation for fraudulent death had been significantly more extensive than initial investigation had suggested, involving systematic asset transfers that began approximately 4 years before his supposed death, rather than the shorter timeline that previous evidence had indicated. These early transfers demonstrated long-term planning that contradicted his claims of sudden business difficulties, while revealing sophisticated understanding of asset concealment techniques that required professional criminal guidance. Agent Morrison's guidance regarding surveillance procedures enabled systematic monitoring of communications between David and his criminal associates, that provided real-time intelligence about their ongoing activities and future plans. This surveillance utilized federal authority to intercept electronic communications while maintaining legal admissibility standards that ensured evidence could be used effectively in prosecution proceedings. The surveillance activities revealed that David had been actively recruiting additional participants for fraudulent death schemes, while expanding his role within the criminal organization from client to operational coordinator. This expanded involvement indicated that David had become integral to criminal operations rather than merely a customer for fraudulent services, creating additional criminal liability while providing opportunities for gathering evidence about the broader organization's structure and activities. The systematic approach to evidence collection that Agent Morrison outlined required careful coordination between multiple investigation activities to ensure comprehensive documentation while avoiding actions that might alert criminal organizations to law enforcement interest. This coordination demanded precise timing and careful attention to operational security that protected investigation integrity while maximizing evidence-gathering effectiveness. My medical background in systematic diagnosis proved valuable for implementing federal investigation protocols, as the methodical attention to detail and careful documentation required for successful prosecution aligned with skills developed through years of clinical practice. The analytical frameworks used for medical diagnosis translated effectively to criminal investigation when applied within federal guidelines and supervisory oversight. The evidence collection activities revealed connections between David's criminal organization and other international fraud networks that operated similar schemes in different geographical regions. These connections indicated criminal ecosystems that shared resources, intelligence, and operational support, while maintaining specialized focus on different types of financial crimes that collectively generated substantial profits for organized criminal enterprises. Agent Morrison's strategy for gathering evidence from within the criminal organization involved careful coordination with other federal investigations that targeted related criminal activities in different jurisdictions. This coordination enabled information sharing that enhanced understanding of criminal operations, while providing opportunities for synchronized law enforcement action that prevented criminals from relocating or modifying their activities to avoid prosecution. The implementation of family security measures that Agent Morrison recommended required significant lifestyle modifications that affected our daily routines, while providing protection from potential retaliation by criminal organizations. These security measures included residential relocation to a secure apartment complex, installation of comprehensive surveillance systems, and modification of work and school schedules to avoid predictable patterns that criminals might exploit for surveillance or intimidation purposes. The financial burden of implementing security measures created additional strain on our family budget, while highlighting the ongoing costs that David's criminal activities continued to impose upon our daily existence. However, Agent Morrison's coordination with federal victim assistance programs provided support that offset some security costs while ensuring adequate protection throughout the investigation period. The psychological adjustment to living under security protocols required careful attention to maintaining normalcy for my children, while implementing protective measures that did not create unnecessary anxiety or disruption to their educational and social development. This balance demanded ongoing communication with school officials, counseling professionals, and family support services that understood the unique challenges associated with witness protection during extended criminal investigations. Sophia's maturity and understanding enabled her to adapt effectively to security requirements while maintaining academic performance and social relationships that supported her continued development. Her ability to follow security protocols without compromising her normal activities demonstrated resilience that reflected her previous experience managing our family's financial challenges following David's supposed death. Miguel's adjustment to security measures required additional support and explanation to help him understand necessary precautions without creating excessive fear about potential threats. His questions about security procedures provided opportunities for age-appropriate discussions about personal safety, while maintaining his confidence in our family's stability and protection. The coordination between federal investigation activities and my continued medical practice required careful scheduling and communication management that ensured professional responsibilities could be maintained while participating effectively in collaborative law enforcement activities. Agent Morrison's understanding of professional obligations enabled flexible scheduling that accommodated medical practice demands while maintaining investigation momentum. The evidence-gathering activities revealed that David's criminal organization maintained sophisticated intelligence operations that monitored law enforcement activities and potential threats to their continued operations. This intelligence capability required enhanced operational security measures while providing opportunities to feed false information that could mislead criminal organizations about investigation scope and timeline. Agent Morrison's guidance regarding interaction with other fraud victims enabled coordination with individuals who had been similarly affected by the criminal organization's activities. These interactions provided mutual support while contributing to comprehensive evidence collection that strengthened federal prosecution prospects for all participants in collaborative investigation efforts. The systematic documentation of criminal activities that federal collaboration required exceeded the scope of my initial investigation while providing comprehensive understanding of criminal operations that supported broader prosecution objectives. This documentation included detailed analysis of financial transactions, communication patterns, operational procedures, and organizational structures that revealed the sophisticated nature of criminal enterprises involved in international fraud schemes. The implementation of Agent Morrison's strategic guidance also revealed opportunities for coordinating with international law enforcement agencies that possessed jurisdiction over criminal activities in Caribbean locations, where David and his associates maintained operations. This international coordination utilized diplomatic channels and mutual assistance treaties that enabled evidence sharing and synchronized law enforcement action across multiple jurisdictions. The progress achieved during initial implementation of federal collaboration strategies provided confidence that systematic professional methodology could achieve comprehensive results that exceeded the limitations of individual investigation efforts. The access to federal resources, international cooperation mechanisms, and professional expertise created opportunities for meaningful impact against sophisticated criminal organizations while protecting victim interests and family security. The transformation in investigation effectiveness that resulted from federal collaboration demonstrated the value of professional guidance and institutional support for addressing complex criminal activities that exceeded individual capabilities, regardless of personal determination or available resources. This collaboration transformed my pursuit of justice from isolated individual action into participation in comprehensive law enforcement efforts with broader impact potential. The deepening complexity of federal collaboration with Agent Morrison gradually revealed internal psychological barriers that threatened to undermine my commitment to exposing David's criminal network, despite the substantial progress achieved through systematic investigation methodology. The sustained pressure of maintaining operational security while managing family responsibilities and professional obligations created emotional strain that challenged my determination to pursue comprehensive justice for crimes that had devastated our family's stability and future prospects. The realization that successful prosecution of David's criminal organization would require months or potentially years of continued collaboration with federal authorities forced me to confront the long-term implications of my decision to pursue justice through professional law enforcement channels. The extended timeline that Agent Morrison had outlined conflicted with my desire for immediate resolution while creating uncertainty about when our family might return to normal circumstances and regain control over our daily existence. The psychological impact of learning about the sophisticated nature of David's deception had evolved from initial shock and anger into more complex emotional responses that included self-doubt about my judgment, fear about potential retaliation from criminal organizations, and guilt about exposing my children to risks that resulted from my decision to pursue accountability for their father's crimes. These conflicting emotions created internal resistance that competed with my rational understanding of the importance of federal collaboration. The gradual revelation that David had been systematically deceiving our family for years before his supposed death created profound challenges to my fundamental assumptions about personal relationships and my ability to recognize deception in intimate circumstances. The recognition that someone I had trusted completely had been capable of such elaborate betrayal forced me to question my judgment in ways that extended beyond the specific circumstances of his fraud to encompass broader concerns about my capacity for accurate assessment of character and motivation. The security protocols that protected our family from potential criminal retaliation required constant vigilance and lifestyle modifications that created ongoing stress for my children, while serving as daily reminders of the dangerous circumstances we faced as a result of my investigation activities. The burden of maintaining these protective measures while attempting to provide normal childhood experiences for Sophia and Miguel demanded emotional energy that left little capacity for processing my own psychological needs. The financial costs associated with security measures and reduced income from modified work schedules created additional pressure that complicated our family's economic circumstances while highlighting the ongoing consequences of David's criminal activities. The irony that pursuing justice for financial crimes continued to impose financial hardship upon our family created frustration that tested my commitment to systematic prosecution efforts that might not yield immediate financial relief. My medical training had emphasized objective analysis and systematic problem-solving approaches that proved valuable for investigation activities, but provided limited guidance for managing the emotional complexity of confronting sophisticated criminal organizations while protecting family members who had not chosen to participate in pursuit of justice. The professional composure that served me well in clinical practice felt inadequate for addressing the personal vulnerability and psychological uncertainty that characterized extended involvement in federal criminal investigations. The recognition that David had been monitoring our family's activities following his supposed death created profound feelings of violation and vulnerability that affected my sense of safety and privacy in ways that security measures could not completely address. The knowledge that our grief, financial struggles, and efforts to rebuild our lives had been observed and documented by the person responsible for our suffering created psychological damage that extended beyond the immediate practical consequences of his deception. The systematic documentation of David's criminal activities that federal collaboration required forced me to repeatedly confront evidence of his betrayal while maintaining professional objectivity that prevented emotional processing of the personal harm his actions had caused. This emotional compartmentalization created internal tension between my role as a federal witness providing evidence for prosecution and my identity as a victim seeking healing and closure from traumatic experiences. The coordination with other fraud victims that Agent Morrison had facilitated revealed the widespread nature of criminal activities that had affected numerous families in circumstances similar to our own situation. While this coordination provided validation and mutual support, it also highlighted the systematic nature of criminal enterprises that deliberately targeted families for financial exploitation, while demonstrating callous disregard for the emotional trauma inflicted upon victims and their children. The international scope of the criminal organization's activities that federal investigation had revealed created concerns about the effectiveness of prosecution efforts that depended upon cooperation from foreign jurisdictions, with different legal systems and enforcement priorities. The complexity of international law enforcement coordination introduced uncertainties that challenged my confidence in systematic approaches while creating anxiety about whether comprehensive justice could be achieved through available legal mechanisms. The revelation that David had evolved from victim of criminal services to active participant in recruiting additional fraud participants created additional psychological complexity regarding my understanding of his moral transformation and the extent of his criminal liability. The recognition that he had chosen to facilitate similar harm against other families challenged my remaining emotional attachment to the person I had believed him to be, while creating anger about his deliberate perpetuation of criminal activities. The demands of maintaining normal professional responsibilities while participating in complex federal investigation activities created scheduling conflicts and performance pressures that affected my medical practice and income generation capabilities. The reduction in professional effectiveness that resulted from divided attention between medical responsibilities and investigation activities created practical concerns about long-term career implications while highlighting the ongoing costs of pursuing justice through extended legal proceedings. The psychological counseling resources that Agent Morrison had recommended for managing stress associated with witness protection and criminal investigation provided professional support for addressing emotional challenges while maintaining focus on prosecution objectives. However, the therapeutic process required confronting painful realities about betrayal and vulnerability that created temporary increases in emotional distress before contributing to improved psychological resilience and coping capabilities. Sophia's questions about the security measures that governed our daily activities required careful explanations that provided adequate information for her cooperation, while avoiding details that might create unnecessary anxiety about potential threats to our family's safety. The balance between honesty and protection in these conversations demanded constant attention to her emotional needs while maintaining operational security requirements that federal authorities had established for our protection. Miguel's adjustment to lifestyle modifications associated with security protocols required ongoing attention to his emotional well-being, while ensuring compliance with protective measures that might not be immediately comprehensible to someone his age. His resilience in adapting to changed circumstances provided inspiration for my own efforts to maintain determination while managing psychological challenges that federal collaboration had created. The recognition that successful prosecution of David's criminal organization could contribute to preventing similar crimes against other families provided motivation that transcended personal grievances while creating moral responsibility for sustained participation in federal investigation efforts. This broader purpose helped counter internal resistance while providing meaning that justified the personal costs and psychological challenges associated with extended collaboration with law enforcement authorities. The development of systematic approaches for managing psychological stress and emotional uncertainty enabled more effective participation in federal investigation activities while maintaining family stability and professional responsibilities. These approaches included structured communication with counseling professionals, regular assessment of family security needs, and careful attention to maintaining personal relationships that provided emotional support throughout extended investigation periods. The strength that emerged from confronting internal resistance, while maintaining commitment to comprehensive justice, demonstrated psychological resilience that had developed through previous experiences managing medical emergencies and complex patient care situations. The same determination that had enabled successful completion of surgical training and building a respected medical practice now supported sustained effort to expose sophisticated criminal organizations, despite substantial personal and professional costs. The transformation of internal resistance into renewed determination reflected growing understanding that pursuing justice through systematic professional methodology offered the most effective approach for achieving accountability while protecting family interests and contributing to broader efforts to combat financial crimes that threatened other potential victims. This transformation enabled continued collaboration with federal authorities while maintaining focus on long-term objectives for comprehensive resolution of criminal activities that had devastated our family's circumstances and future prospects. The escalation of external obstacles began with subtle indicators that the criminal organization had detected federal law enforcement interest in their operations and had begun implementing sophisticated countermeasures designed to obstruct investigation activities, while protecting key personnel and assets from potential prosecution. Agent Morrison's assessment of these developments revealed that David's criminal associates possessed intelligence capabilities and defensive resources that significantly complicated federal investigation efforts, while creating new risks for our family's safety and security. The first indication of criminal countermeasures appeared through disruption of electronic surveillance operations that had been providing valuable intelligence about the organization's communications and operational planning. The technical sophistication of these countermeasures indicated access to professional security services and advanced technology that enabled systematic detection and neutralization of federal surveillance activities without directly confronting law enforcement personnel or creating obvious evidence of obstruction. Agent Morrison explained that sophisticated criminal organizations routinely monitored law enforcement activities through various intelligence-gathering methods that included surveillance of federal personnel, monitoring of court records and administrative filings, and systematic analysis of communication patterns that might indicate investigation interest. These intelligence capabilities enabled criminal organizations to adjust their operations proactively while implementing protective measures that reduced their vulnerability to prosecution efforts. The criminal organization's response to detected federal interest included systematic destruction of evidence that might support prosecution efforts while relocating key personnel and assets to jurisdictions that provided enhanced protection from United States law enforcement authority. These defensive measures demonstrated organizational discipline and strategic planning that indicated professional criminal management rather than improvised responses to unexpected law enforcement attention. The relocation of criminal operations to alternative Caribbean jurisdictions with more restrictive cooperation agreements with United States authorities created additional obstacles for federal investigation efforts, while providing enhanced security for criminal personnel who might otherwise be vulnerable to arrest and prosecution. These jurisdictional moves reflected sophisticated understanding of international legal frameworks and diplomatic procedures that criminal organizations exploited to maintain operational freedom. Agent Morrison's analysis of criminal countermeasures revealed that David's organization maintained extensive legal resources that included corrupt officials within various government agencies who provided advance warning of law enforcement activities while facilitating administrative protection for criminal operations. The scope of this corruption network indicated systematic compromise of legitimate institutions that extended federal investigation requirements while creating additional security concerns for witnesses and victims. The criminal organization's intelligence operations had identified my role in providing evidence for federal prosecution efforts, resulting in systematic surveillance of our family's activities that tested the effectiveness of security measures while creating new concerns about potential retaliation or intimidation tactics. This surveillance demonstrated criminal capabilities for monitoring protected witnesses while indicating sophisticated understanding of federal protection protocols and their potential vulnerabilities. The intimidation campaign that criminal organizations initiated against my family included anonymous communications that contained detailed information about our daily activities, security arrangements, and personal relationships in ways that demonstrated comprehensive surveillance capabilities, while creating psychological pressure designed to discourage continued cooperation with federal authorities. These communications avoided direct threats while clearly indicating criminal knowledge of our circumstances and potential vulnerability to retaliation. Agent Morrison's assessment of criminal intimidation tactics revealed that sophisticated organizations typically avoided direct violence against federal witnesses while employing psychological pressure, legal harassment, and financial sabotage that created substantial hardship without providing clear evidence of criminal activity that could support additional prosecution charges. These indirect approaches enabled continued pressure while minimizing risks of additional criminal liability that direct intimidation might create. The legal harassment campaign that criminal associates initiated included frivolous litigation against my medical practice and personal finances that created administrative burdens and legal costs, while providing opportunities for continued surveillance through legitimate legal discovery procedures. These tactics demonstrated sophisticated understanding of civil legal procedures that enabled systematic harassment while maintaining apparent legitimacy that complicated law enforcement response efforts. The financial sabotage activities that criminal organizations employed included systematic attacks on credit ratings, fraudulent financial account activities, and interference with professional licensing and insurance arrangements that created practical obstacles for maintaining normal business and personal activities. These attacks required constant attention and administrative effort, while creating ongoing financial costs that strained our family's resources during an already challenging period. Agent Morrison explained that criminal organizations possessed extensive resources for sustained harassment campaigns that could continue indefinitely, while avoiding direct confrontation with federal authorities that might trigger enhanced law enforcement response. The systematic nature of these campaigns indicated professional criminal management that understood the psychological and practical impact of sustained pressure while maintaining operational security that protected criminal personnel from prosecution. The expansion of criminal surveillance activities to include my children's school and social activities created additional security concerns that required enhanced protective measures while limiting their normal activities and social relationships. The recognition that criminal organizations were willing to involve children in their intimidation strategies indicated escalating pressure while demonstrating callous disregard for innocent family members who had no involvement in federal investigation activities. The coordination between multiple criminal organizations that Agent Morrison's investigation revealed indicated systematic cooperation between international criminal networks that shared resources and intelligence, while providing mutual support for resisting law enforcement activities. This cooperation enabled enhanced defensive capabilities while creating additional obstacles for federal prosecution efforts that had to address multiple criminal enterprises simultaneously. The technical sophistication of criminal countermeasures included advanced electronic warfare capabilities that disrupted federal communication systems while interfering with surveillance equipment and investigative technology. These capabilities indicated access to military-grade technology and professional expertise that exceeded typical criminal resources while demonstrating the substantial financial success of organized crime operations. Agent Morrison's assessment of criminal defensive capabilities revealed that successful prosecution of sophisticated international criminal organizations required sustained effort over extended periods, while accepting significant risks and costs that exceeded normal law enforcement operations. The recognition that criminal organizations possessed resources and capabilities that rivaled legitimate institutions highlighted the challenges involved in achieving comprehensive justice through available legal mechanisms. The diplomatic complications that criminal countermeasures created included systematic corruption of foreign officials who provided protection for criminal operations, while obstructing international cooperation agreements that federal authorities required for effective prosecution efforts. These complications introduced political considerations that extended investigation timelines, while creating uncertainties about ultimate success in achieving comprehensive accountability for criminal activities. The media manipulation campaigns that criminal organizations initiated included systematic dissemination of false information about federal investigation activities, while creating public relations challenges that complicated law enforcement efforts, and created additional pressure for rapid resolution of complex cases that required extended investigation periods. These campaigns demonstrated sophisticated understanding of media influence, while providing additional tools for obstructing federal prosecution efforts. The witness intimidation programs that criminal organizations implemented against other fraud victims who might provide evidence for federal prosecution included systematic harassment and threats that discouraged cooperation with law enforcement, while reducing the availability of evidence necessary for successful prosecution efforts. These programs indicated organizational capabilities for wide-scale intimidation, while demonstrating commitment to protecting criminal operations through comprehensive defensive strategies. Agent Morrison's guidance regarding response to escalating criminal countermeasures emphasized the importance of maintaining operational security while avoiding emotional reactions that might compromise investigation effectiveness or create additional vulnerabilities that criminal organizations could exploit. Her experience with similar cases provided strategic frameworks for managing pressure while maintaining focus on long-term prosecution objectives. The enhanced security protocols that federal authorities implemented in response to escalating criminal countermeasures required additional lifestyle modifications while providing improved protection against sophisticated surveillance and intimidation tactics. These protocols included advanced communication security, enhanced physical protection, and modified daily routines that reduced predictability while maintaining necessary activities for family and professional responsibilities. The recognition that criminal organizations were investing substantial resources in defensive measures indicated their assessment that federal investigation posed serious threats to their continued operations, while demonstrating their commitment to protecting criminal enterprises through comprehensive resistance strategies. This escalating resistance confirmed the significance of investigation efforts, while highlighting the determination required for achieving meaningful prosecution results against sophisticated criminal organizations. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.